I come from the Israeli left, essentially from also the political camp and period that believed that the only thing standing between us and peace is a Palestinian state, Palestinian control of territory, only to realize that whenever they had the chance to have a state through direct negotiations, through Israeli withdrawals, they either would walk away from the negotiations, follow it up with violence, and no one within Palestinian society would question that choice, or they would turn whatever territory they controlled into a base to try to, in their words, liberate Palestine from the river to the sea, essentially no Jewish state. And as I came to question what Palestinians really are after, given that they repeatedly don't take the opportunity to establish a state, which is not normal behavior for movements that claim to be movements of self-determination and liberation, only to realize that they've always told us what they wanted. Certainly in my political camp, we just didn't listen to them, or when we did, it sounded so preposterous that we thought it was just bluster. But I've come to realize that this is tragically the ideology and identity that unites the Arabs of Gaza, the West Bank, millions in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, under what I've come to call Palestinianism, which is, I say, it has 4 core tenets: from the river to the sea, there will be no Jewish state, and we are therefore perpetual refugees until return. And return, if anyone ever wondered, is what October 7th was all about. The new book I have in Israel about return shows how Sinwar and Hamas leaders, all the way leading up to the massacre, said the day of return is near. And on that day, they said, we are returning. So I've come to realize that this is the obstacle to peace, nothing else. You could say it in another way, that the Jews have always agreed to every 2-state solution, provided one of the two is the Jewish state, and the Arabs have always rejected every 2-state solution if one of the two is the Jewish state. And if we're ever to get to peace, that ideology, which is all about negation, has to be destroyed. So we really need to follow in the footsteps, like with Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, where societies were governed by terrible ideologies and were only taken on a path of change once they were defeated, and that they were made to understand that what brought them to defeat and ruin and destruction was their ideology. That they were not, as too many people allow Palestinians to believe, just pure victims of some outside evil, rather than conscious agents in history that have made ideological choice to prioritize destroying what the Jews have built rather than building for themselves. So in order to go on that path, we need to ensure that this time around, unlike the last century, the fighting does not end with some wishy-washy ceasefire that only allows Palestinians to try again, which is what they've been doing for the last century, believing that they haven't lost, that their victory is merely delayed. They need to understand that they've been defeated. They need to acknowledge it. And they need to appreciate that there's a relationship of cause and effect between their ideological pursuit of the destruction of the Jewish state, rather than building something for themselves, and the destruction and ruin that they are facing right now. And only when you finally establish that cause and effect, something that they were allowed to evade and avoid for a century, can you begin to really take them on a different route, such as the ones that the countries of the Abraham Accords have begun taking, one that creates a proud Arab and Muslim identity that is not obsessively about destroying the Jewish state. So my argument is that given that Palestinianism unites only several millions of people in terms of an identity, It's not impossible to change that. But the reason that they've been able to persist for a century in trying again, is that they've been fueled and supported by so many powers, many anti-Semitic powers in history, from the Nazis to the Pan-Arabists, to the Soviets, to the Iranians, to the Qataris. But they've been supported, unfortunately, by organizations like UNRWA, which is fueling station number one of Palestinianism. Through Western money, UN legitimacy, the Arabs have been able for decades to tell themselves the world is with us as we are working on destroying Israel. And at one point, the West, which funds UNRWA, has to assume responsibility not for what they think they're doing when they're giving money, but what Palestinians think when they receive the money. And what Palestinians think and say is that UNRWA is their guarantor of return. I even have a visual, a big poster at the entrance to a neighborhood near Beit Lechem, which is called a refugee camp, but no one there is a refugee by any international standards. It's not a camp, it's a neighborhood. But the entrance has a poster that says, UNRWA services are our right until return. So they're saying, you, the Australian government, will fund us not until there's a two-state solution or anything that the Australian government claims to want. You, the Australian government, will keep giving us money until we achieve our goal of no Jewish state. And at one point, the Australian government has to take responsibility for giving money to the way that the Palestinians interpret taking that money, and not the Australian interpretation of giving them. Over the years, I've come to the description that there is feeling good and doing good, and they're definitely not the same. And that a lot of the people who claim to want to do good just want to feel good. And everything you described are basically means of what some people call virtue signaling, feeling good, feeling that we're doing the right things, we're promoting peace, a two-state solution. But it does no good, because the conflict has only ever been about the complete rejection of a Jewish state in any border whatsoever. So if they really want to promote a two-state solution, I'm willing to go with them. Fine, this is really your intention. How about finally ensuring that the Palestinians understand that one of the two states is the Jewish state? So you want to recognize Palestine? Fine, make it clear that no one living in Palestine is a Palestine refugee. That would be weird. Defund UNRWA doesn't make sense. Issue a legal opinion that makes it very clear that there's no such thing as a right of return into Israel, because there's just no such right. Do that package, which would convey a message that a two-state solution is one in which one is a Jewish state, not two Arab states, as the Palestinianists imagine them. Then I would take you at their word. But from what it appears, they're not being serious. They just want to do this feel-good virtue signaling stuff rather than do the things that might not be pleasant, but would actually promote real peace. So what I've come to describe it is something that I call the placard strategy, which you see on placards in anti-Israel demonstration, which is the equation of Israel, Zionism, and the Star of David, with every word that is considered synonymous with evil, from imperialism, colonialism, apartheid, racism, escalating into ethnic cleansing, Nazism, genocide, Holocaust. If you're an American 2020 during Black Lives Matter, suddenly Zionism equals white supremacy. And what this does is create this repetition that gets laundered through institutions of prestige like various UN institutions, academia, human rights institutions, that presents Israel, Zionism, the Star of David, as uniquely evil, thereby prepping the ground for the vision that the world would be a better place without Israel, without Zionism, without the collective Jew. And that is what I highlight to people is one of the most ancient, but also one of the most dangerous ideas. The idea that the collective Jew stands between this world and utopia. It appears on a placard that we saw out after October 7th that said, "Keep the world clean," with an image of a Star of David and a flag of Israel and a trash bin. And what I highlight for people is that they need to understand that they're participating in something that is very dangerous. It's not about what they feel, they think. Everyone who participates in that is sure that they're doing something good. I always say that the biggest failure of Holocaust education is that people might know so much about the Nazis and the death camp, but very few people will be able to crystallize the insight that everything the Nazis did was downstream from their belief that they're keeping the world clean, that they're birthing utopia, that by physically getting rid of the collective Jew one by one, there will be a better world on the other side of it. That's what they believed. And this is what's happening. And people right now believe that they're participating in something good, and there's unfortunately many Jews in it, and Jews participated in other, in communism. They believed, again, they were birthing a global utopia, only to realize too late that it turned on them, and it always does. So what I try is to let people know that this is not about Israel or Zionism or this government or this minister. It's really about creating this 360 environment that leads young people who want to do good in the world to believe that they are birthing utopia, but they are following a well-worn playbook that ultimately tends to spiral societies into destruction and typically ends with no Jews being in that society. A lot of governments, for example, I know that the foreign minister says, okay, we are committed to international law. But the amazing thing is that international law is actually incredibly reasonable and rational. It was drafted by people who knew that you had to win wars. It was not drafted by pacifists. And people pretend that that's what's happening with Israel. But with Israel, it's like made up rules. International law makes it very clear. You use schools and hospitals for military purposes, they become military targets. You use, the doctrine of proportionality. It doesn't say that you need to kill the same number of people. It says that you need to assess this threat and the collateral damage. There's an understanding that civilians will be killed in warfare. International law is rational. It says that you need to allow supplies to reach the population, children, women, but you can block it if you know that it's helping your enemy, which we have evidence for. There's no international law that says that you need to supply your enemy while you're still at war with them, while it goes to continue the war, while they refuse to surrender and hold your hostages. Yet somehow people behave as if this is an obvious rule, and how dare Israel not continuously supply its enemy at a time of war. So there's all these made-up rules for Israel. You can't take any of Gaza's territory. No war was ever fought this way. The civilian population has to stay there. In every other conflict, let them out. Other countries take them in. Here, they must stay. So international law is actually incredibly reasonable. Israel abides by it, by the way, above and beyond. But people somehow pretend and create unique rules for Israel, and then when Israel doesn't abide by those completely invented rules, people cry as if Israel is really going against something that is so obvious. You only need to use 3 brain cells to understand that Israel wants this to succeed. Israel wants the alternative aid means to succeed. Again, this is above and beyond Israel's responsibility, but still Israel wants it to succeed, knowing how UNRWA and other aid organizations have extended the war, extended the suffering by extending the war. Israel wants it to succeed. You just need 3 operating brain cells. But if you've been led to believe that Israel's uniquely evil, then you will believe that Israel lures starving people in order to kill them. You'll believe anything. But in terms of the images, people say, oh, we see those images. What can you expect? I tell them, do a thought process. Same images. I mean, we can even discuss why those are the images with that intensity, but same images. But imagine that the news report begins this way. It's been 600 days that Hamas, as the continued governing force of Gaza, refuses to surrender, refuses to allow people to leave the territory, is hiding in schools and hospitals, and has built its entire strategy on creating all of Gaza as a united, weaponized landscape. And as a result, people are dying. Imagine that this would be the framework. You could still have the same images, but the anger would be directed at the people actually responsible. So people pretend as if, how can you expect these images? But no, the question is, are they decontextualized images with the underlying tone that this is Israel's responsibility? Or would be images that says 600 days after launching a brutal attack with images that we can still show you how barbaric they were, the government of Gaza refuses to surrender, continues to put its people through a terrible war, using them as shields for its continued war. You could report the same images. People say, oh, the Israeli public doesn't see those images. We see them, but we just have the correct context that we know how the government of Gaza operates. We know what the war is about, and we know that they still refuse to surrender while still holding our hostages.